Evening, everybody. Welcome to the Monday, July 10th meeting of the City of Evanston's Planning and Development Committee. I'm 4th Ward Councilmember Jonathan Nusma, your host for the evening. Let's start off with a roll call.
Councilmember Reed.
Point of order. My apologies. I don't believe we're recording yet. I don't see the red record.
Are we recording? Staff, Anderson, are you back there?
Recording in progress.
There we go.
There we go.
Familiar voice.
Thank you,
all right.
Councilmember Reed.
Okay, Councilmember Reed.
Aye, or here.
Councilmember Hadakaris. Not. Councilmember Revelle.
Here.
Councilmember Burns.
Here.
Councilmember Wynn. Here. Councilmember Kelly. Here. And Councilmember Nusma.
Here.
We have a quorum.
A quorum being present, we will continue with our agenda. The next item is item M1, approval of the minutes from our last meeting. I will note that one correction has been made on page 7 of 7 of those minutes. Item D1 passed on a 6-0 vote. So that, with that correction in place, is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
And it's been properly moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Wynn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. The minutes are approved, which brings us to public comment. We have 3 people signed up online, and Director Flax is about to tell us how many people are signed up. Or 3 people signed up in person.
Bring some up so
and online.
And 3 more online.
And 3 more online. Who are those names online?
Janet Alexander Davis, Tricia Connolly, and Chuck Wasserberg.
Okay. Okay, we will go with in-person first, which is Wendy Pollock, followed by Cherie LeBlanc Fisher, and then Jack Weiss. 2 minutes each, please.
All right, thank you. Good evening. I'm Wendy Pollock. I'm chair of the Environment Board, speaking about P1. The Environment Board urges Planning and Development and City Council to join us in supporting the proposed ordinance to protect trees on private property. In doing so, the city will address explicitly stated recommendations of the 2018 Climate Action and Resilience Plan, the 2022 Evanston Project for the Assessment of Local Needs, the E-Plan, and also a commitment in the 2022 CARP action agenda that was part of last April's declaration of a climate emergency. All of these were adopted by unanimous vote of the City Council. Oh, in taking this action, Evanston will join neighboring communities like Wilmette and cities in other parts of the country, like Cambridge, for example, that have already taken this important step. The Environment Board has been discussing and considering this updated ordinance for actually longer than I'm sure right now, probably 3 years or longer. During that time, community members providing public comment at Environment Board meetings have spoken universally in favor of preventing healthy trees from being cut down on private property. The board has worked back and forth with city staff and members of City Council to discuss the language, provisions, and trade-offs reflected in the current proposed ordinance. We also have extensively discussed and considered the importance of equity in both the wording and implementation of this ordinance. It meets the goals of the Environment Board. Evanston's urban forest provides benefits to everyone in the community. We all share responsibility for caring for this resource, and we hope the council will support the ordinance as written. Thank you.
Under the wire. Thank you. Next up is Cherie LeBlanc Fisher.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cherie LeBlanc Fisher, and I've lived in Evanston for 20 years. I just completed 2 terms on the board of on the Environment Board, and I served as the board's co-chair for about 4 years. I've also worked for the U.S. Forest Service for about 20 years. I'm here to speak in service of the proposed tree protection ordinance. Peer-reviewed scientific literature has shown over and over again that trees provide a range of services and benefits, especially in cities. The connections between trees and climate change and between trees and public health may not be obvious to everyone, but there are many proven connections. When we have record summer heat, trees help cool our homes, our cars, sidewalks, and public spaces. When we have intense rainstorms, trees keep soil from eroding and absorb stormwater. When we have smoke from Canadian wildfires or other pollutants, our trees help clean the air. It is easy to think of trees on private property as privately owned, but they are a community resource that benefits everyone. Removal of large mature trees in particular eliminates benefits and services that cannot be replaced for decades by planting new trees. 70 to 80% of Evanston's tree canopy is on private land, so it is not enough to maintain trees along only roads or on public land, excuse me. Here are my two takeaways. The urban forest, number one, the urban forest is a collective resource that we all rely on for physical and mental health, improved property values, air and water quality, stormwater reduction, wildlife habitat, and many other services. And number two, removing just one mature tree eliminates benefits that cannot be replaced for decades by planting small trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Jack Weiss in person, and then that will be Jack will be followed by Janet Alexander Davis, Tricia Connolly, and Chuck Wasserberg online, and Gail Schechter has been added to that list as well. So, Mr. Weiss.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Jack Weiss. I live at 400 Main Street, 3rd Ward, and I presented my full credentials at your June 26th meeting, so I won't repeat them. Tonight I'm speaking as a founding member and past president of Design Evanston. I spoke in support of the Community Design Commission at the June 26th meeting, and I have a few more comments tonight, specifically addressing the 3 questions asked of you in Kate Sterling's presentation. On page 2, should further development of the framework for this commission wait until after the comprehensive general plan and zoning ordinance are adopted? And my answer to that is establishment of the new comprehensive plan is at least 2 years in the future. Too many important things will occur long before that time, and will need to be addressed by the Community Design Commission. On page 3, Evanston has a very low plan development threshold, and many communities surveyed further define applicable projects by zoning district, a specific increase in floor area, new construction of a specific size, or use of overlay districts. Should the applicability be adjusted to be more specific and limit or expand the types of projects that fall under the compulsory review process? And my answer is this issue could be clarified and resolved by the new comprehensive general plan, and on the question, is premature. Fourth, on page 4, should the types of reviews be offered to
15 seconds.
Be adjusted and simplified? And my answer is mitigation of adverse impacts and overall public benefits provided are 2 separate issues, and I don't think public benefits should be addressed by CDC. I urge you to approve this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This brings us to online comment. Next up is Janet Alexander Davis, followed by Tricia Connolly, then Chuck Wasserberg and Gail Schechter. So, Ms. Alexander Davis, you have 2 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am co-chair of Environmental Justice Evanston along with Jerry Gall. On behalf of Environmental Justice Evanston, we strongly support the proposed tree preservation ordinance as well as Evanston's affordable housing goals. So we were concerned to learn about the staff memo included in your packet that raises issues around potential negative impacts. As a lifelong resident of the 5th Ward, a real estate broker since 1987, and I am currently one, licensed, environmental justice, I understand the housing crisis. I know it must be addressed by thoughtful planning that is consistent with all of our environmental and climate goals, not by creating a false conflict with the goals of tree preservation. Evanston trees form an interconnected urban forest, whether on public land or private property, that provides valuable environmental services like improved air quality, cooling shade, and habitat for birds and other wildlife. City planners should look for solutions that can satisfy both goals. The environmental justice advocates in Evanston have heard strong support for an enhanced tree canopy in the 5th Ward and in other underserved areas in Evanston. These neighborhoods suffer from higher temperatures due to the presence of fewer shade trees thriving in an interconnected, healthy urban forest. A plan for sustainable, fair housing that enhances both public health and climate resilience will include compliance
15
with the
seconds.
proposed tree ordinance. The tree preservation ordinance is just one step towards keeping our urban forest strong and sustained for generations to come. Good city planning and development can ensure that we don't have to sacrifice one asset for another. We encourage you to vote yes tonight on the tree preservation ordinance. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next up is Tricia Connolly, followed by Chuck Wasserberg, and then Gail Schechter.
Hello, Tricia Conley, 2nd Ward. I am calling about the tree ordinance as well. And to Janet Alexander Davis's point, I was a little startled that the development concerns from the city, the community development, had to do with affordable housing. And to which I'm wondering, at what point do we not elevate affordability in the realm of what people get as far as tree canopy, like people who aren't in a situation of needing more affordable housing? I think if we are about equity and inclusion in this town, this is not even a comment that should be being made. So I will say that please support the ordinance. And in addition, in regard to the Design Review Committee, I am really excited to see that get pushed through and people getting to work on that. But again, there is a comment about not having design requirements on affordable housing. And I think we need to take another look at this and really ask ourselves, are we about equity and inclusion when we start pulling out, situations where people with, less then get less, and we're not doing anything different. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next up is Chuck Wasserberg, and then Gail Schechter.
Hi there. I'm speaking on behalf of Climate Action Evanston, which represents a network of about 2,500 people in the area. We strongly support Evanston's affordable housing goals and the city's goals to maintain a healthy urban forest. People have already spoken very eloquently with great authority about the positive impacts of trees and urban canopy on public health, so I'm not going to get into that. But I do want to point out again, as some people have, housing and canopy are not mutually exclusive goals for Evanston. Evanston can and should do both: build more affordable housing and create more green space. And in fact, they should create more green spaces at and around new and existing affordable housing. So with that said, we urge you to support the proposed tree preservation ordinance. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. Gail Schechter is next.
Yes, thank you. Gail Schechter. I'm a member of the board of Community Alliance for Better Government. I would echo everybody on the tree ordinance and its compatibility with affordable housing, although I'm here to speak on your discussion of a community design commission. We think it's a terrific idea to do, but we are baffled by why single family and 2-family homes, landmark properties, and affordable housing would be excluded from what you describe as, quote, ensuring the new zoning ordinance facilitates the type of built environment and design decisions that are desired. Certainly affordable housing benefits from environmental sustainability. Anything that has to do with lowering energy costs would be desired, LEED certified. but also thinking about trauma-informed design, healing spaces, communal spaces in a building. There was something in here about human-centered design and street activation. Well, that's important to affordable housing. So absolutely, affordable housing should be part of the compulsory advisory review. Not sure why you also excluded single-family and two-family homes either from this, but certainly to speak to affordable housing. So I hope you're moving in the right direction and include affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else wishing to address the committee? I don't see anybody in person. I don't hear anybody online. So we're good? You can have 2 minutes right now, if you'd like.
Good evening. I'm Tom Hoffmeyer. I'm Evanston resident for 26 years and Design Evanston member for the last 16. I'm here to ask you to support the creation of the Community Design Commission, draft of which we've had for a couple of weeks. In supporting the creation of the Community Design Commission, I strongly suggest that everyone read carefully the statement of purpose and objectives at the
Can I ask you to use the microphone?
Of the draft proposal.
If you could speak more directly into the microphone, that people at
Right.
home can hear you too.
If enacted, I believe the Community Design Commission will be a committee whose emphasis will be on quality of design in ways that code and statutory requirements do not address. Such a committee will also bring into play designers and design professionals whose experience can add fresh insights to project designs and bring about added benefits for projects, users, city residents, and the city as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no further members of the public wishing to address the committee, we will continue with our agenda. That brings us to item P1. If somebody would like to make a motion on item P1.
I will move item P1, ordinance 15023, amending Title 7, Chapter 8, concerning the protection of trees on private property.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Ravel. So I would like to frame this discussion by asking staff, starting with Emily Alcalau, to give us a brief explanation of what's in front of us and how we got here. And then Director Flax, if you could address some of the concerns that have been raised. And after those, after the committee hears from the both of you, then we will have some discussion.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and members of the committee. Emily Ogalau, Public Services Coordinator for the Public Works Agency. I'll also note that I'm a certified arborist just because it might be relevant tonight. So we are here tonight to discuss protecting trees on private property. As my colleagues in the Environment Board noted, this has been going around for a few years. It actually predates my time with the city. But this item, so staff brought this item to council a couple of years ago and asked for some direction, at which point it was given to the Environment Board to develop. The Environment Board asked staff to participate in developing the ordinance. The Environment Board provided their goals. They provided sort of the general framework for what they wanted to see out of this ordinance. I actually looked those over just before the meeting, to make sure. And what was requested at the time was that trees 6 inches and above were protected, that protected trees were protected from damage, and that protected trees would also require a permit if they were to be removed. Staff took those items, those goals, and also spoke to peers in neighboring communities. There are examples of tree preservation ordinances throughout, the area and throughout the North Shore, and staff reached out to those peers to discuss how those ordinances work, how trees are protected. And one of the sort of resounding comments that was received, the feedback that was received, is that they often impose heavy fines. They impose a lot of money, but they don't necessarily protect trees. They allow trees to be removed and become a financial burden, especially for property owners who might be more vulnerable, financially vulnerable. So staff took that information and worked together with community development to look at what would it actually look like to protect trees. And that's sort of where we are tonight. staff recognizes that I'm just going to put this out there, recognizes that there are instances when trees need to be removed, when trees are dead, when trees are hazardous, when they are not appropriate for their site. There's a clear path for that. It's an easy path. And so just, to answer that question ahead of time in case that comes up, there is a clear, easy path for that. Second to that, most often trees are impacted when there is construction on property, right? When there is some sort of excavation, some sort of digging, some sort of addition. And so staff wanted to understand what it would look like to be able to get ahead of that process so that property owners are not burdened with different processes. And so a tree preservation permit essentially is something that property owners or their contractors would request. They would provide information about the work that they would like to do on their properties, and that would be integrated into the workflow of other types of building permits as appropriate. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Yeah? Is there anything else I can provide about how the ordinance is structured?
What if I'm not planning an addition? I'm not planning a new kitchen. I'm not planning a new garage. There's a tree
Right.
that's bugging me. I want to cut it down.
Right, and so staff, this ordinance is actually based on Wilmette's recent tree ordinance. And in Wilmette, when there is no construction on private property, trees that are protected by the ordinance cannot be removed without requesting a variation. And that's what staff has done in this ordinance. So in this ordinance, property owners who would like to remove a tree just because they don't like the look of it, they have to request a variation. There's no process through the building permit process to be able to do that. I will also note, actually coming back to the building permit process, one of the things that this process allows is that in cases where there is going to be construction but not a tree removal, the person on staff who is going to be a certified arborist, so essentially a staff arborist, can go out and do a site assessment and say, okay, if you do your construction this way, this is how you're going to impact the trees on your property and any trees on neighboring property that are close enough to your project. And there is opportunity to mitigate that impact, right? So we know that construction often will hurt tree roots. It might hurt, the trunk of the tree, it might even hurt the canopy, the leaves and the branches. And so staff can say, okay, this project can move forward and this tree can exist healthily with this project if we take these 3 steps to protect against that. And so it's a benefit also not just, for trees that want to be removed, but also for trees just in protecting trees to ensure, that there's sort of no undue or, unintended impact to these trees. So those are parts of the ordinance also that we included.
Thank you. Let's hear from Director Flax, and then we'll open it up for more questions from the committee.
Sure. We actually, community development staff worked with Emily on this ordinance, but there are just some areas that we think that need to be clarified and perhaps need a little more thought and work. One of the things, whenever you make a change like this and introduce something, especially when code is in a place people aren't used to, let's at least cross-reference to the zoning code or someplace where people are normally looking, and hopefully we can do outreach to help educate people, because there's always, whenever you're doing, we have people who want to get their projects going fast, and when they find out they have another step and things like that, we want to try to keep that from being a, oh my God, what's the city asking of me now? And I think we can do that. Will it solve every problem? No, we'll never solve every problem with people being impatient about permitting time and things like that. It will have significant impact. We're in the process of moving to our electronic permitting, which involves well over the 30 permit and processes that would be affected by this ordinance or could be affected by this ordinance. So quite frankly, we would ask for consideration of pushing the implementation date back to maybe July 1st of next year, simply because getting the permitting process working in the new environment and then immediately starting before we've even gotten it going, changing, is a little bit overwhelming for community development and for an effective process. It was helpful just in our discussion with Emily about really what applicants are expected. If you read the ordinance literally, and it's saying, asking for, it says a diagram, but how specific does the diagram have to be? When we get things for zoning purposes, for example, everything has to be actual distances and accurate, because that's part of what we need.
To scale, right?
And it's especially in this case, the responsibility will fall to the arborist on site to really check the distances and confirm the what trees are impacted, and this also extends to the neighbor's trees. In other words, you don't have to have an accurate distances and size of trees, and even the type of trees. The arborist will ultimately be responsible for that. Now, perhaps the language could be less specific of what's required so people don't freak out, because it can be a little overwhelming. I mean, an awful lot of people can't identify any types of trees, but I think we can work that out working with staff. We just wanted to, there had been an initial estimate that was done some time ago that Emily was working with, about 400 to 500 permits would be affected, and it could be actually quite a few more than that, and we wanted to make that clear because it is something that would have impact on really a lot of things. So that was what the chart was helping to show. We also discussed that some permits could be exempted based on knowledge of how they work. Interestingly enough, fence installers do not want to put a fence in the middle of a tree, so they're going to work around it. There is still, I would think, some concern about potentially drilling post holes too close to a tree or something like that, but in the grand scheme of things, it was determined that those fence permits could be exempt from this review. And there may be some others that we have to look at some of these. And I think that what we can do on that is rather than, and this is something Emily wants to do and I absolutely agree with, you don't put that in the ordinance. You put, there are some permits which are exempt, and see the trees preservation policy for specifics, because we may have to change things as we find out just really what impact different things have on trees just based on our built environment. So I think that that's something that we need to do and make sure is incorporated. I already talked about people not having to have really accurate things about their neighbor's property, which is good. We do sometimes have neighbors not cooperating on each other's projects next door, and we don't want to inspire any more battles based on where their trees are. Realistically, just based on the distance that we're looking at for potential impact of 25 feet, that was a concern based on small lots are automatically, people in closer neighborhoods are automatically going to be more affected by this. Again, I think the mitigation is really that the bulk of the determination of what trees are really going to be affected is for the arborist. Now, that makes me think that we're going to have a very busy arborist, and I do think that, I hope we can make a 2-week period during which this can be resolved for everything, because, I mean, it really could significantly extend timeframes. And believe me, I'm a supporter of protecting trees. I pretty carefully have my swamp white oaks trimmed regularly and things like that, and I was glad to see that that was exempted, because when you're using a certified arborist, you want to encourage that kind of behavior. There could be some impact on people being reluctant to plant trees. I hope we can just because they are worried about being, how it could restrict them. I hope we can perhaps even have, I can dream, people who would help people think about, oh, you want to add an addition in X amount of time? Let's talk now, and how might you do that? And start people thinking much sooner about how anything they do could affect trees. Will some people, we have some people who don't want trees on their parkway because they don't want leaves. I mean, we can't solve every problem. I'm not going to try to do that. But I think there are ways to mitigate that. I think the challenge we are going to run into with some things like accessory dwelling units, detached accessory dwelling units, is they frequently are in parts of lots that really could, toward the back and things like that. And frequently people have their trees toward the back of their yard, and it could impact them. And accessory dwelling units that we're trying to encourage to develop smaller units in different parts of town where we don't have those types of units really is something that has a lot of things that make them difficult. It's expensive to construct a relatively small dwelling unit, for example, and some of the other, we have, for example, in our building code, exempted those small dwelling units from being sprinklered unless the primary dwelling is sprinklered, specifically looking for ways to reduce the costs, because the costs can get high enough that they become just frankly impractical. And one of the things we've talked about with Emily is, are there certain types of buildings like ADUs that we should give some consideration to? Because if you do have to take out a big tree to be able to do this, and then you have to either put in more trees or pay a fee, it really could be onerous. And I think that it would be very helpful to have consideration from council on any types of construction that we might want to allow some maybe lesser cost or something to deal with.
If I could interject at this point, you've kind of enumerated
the
some
last
concerns.
thing last one is, I really think it would be very helpful for everyone if the draft of the tree canopy preservation policy were attached. I think it would be important for council and everybody else to understand the real specifics.
So if I could kind of summarize my understanding of the conversation, is that we are fairly close to getting where we need to be able to pass an ordinance which has the full and robust support of the Community Development Department. But there are still some issues for which guidance is being requested. And before we go to committee discussion, let's just kind of summarize. I'll ask you both to summarize what kind of guidance are you asking for here, if you could be specific about the input that you are desiring to receive from this committee.
I would like us to consider any types of building like ADUs or perhaps fully affordable developments and things like that, that really the economics of paying additional fees can really make a difference. Those are key things I think we need to consider and have feedback on.
Sure, I would agree with that statement. I think from a tree protection and preservation point of view, I feel confident that I believe that what we've presented actually does the job of protecting trees. I'd like to clarify one thing that Sarah said and just sort of make it very clear that there's no situation in which a property owner would be required or a staff member would be required to go onto a neighboring property in order to issue these permits. All the work could be done from the subject property. There would be absolutely no access to a neighboring property required. I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay.
Plain English, yeah.
Thank you. You'll both remain available.
Yep.
So I will now go to the committee for discussion, and Councilmember Kelly was first.
Thank you.
Followed by Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I think this ordinance looks wonderful. And I had one question, though, regarding application for variances. Mm-hmm. Is there any reason those couldn't go instead to the environmental board for assessment or for appeals? It just seems like there's experts there on the board.
So we spoke about that internally extensively, actually, about where it should go. And I believe it has to do with, is Liz here? Liz is here. It has to do with the sort of mandate of the Environment Board, with the language around it. And since, I don't believe that the Environment Board can make those types of recommendations. I don't believe that that's part of their, sorry? A standing, yeah, thank you. I will say that as far as variations, the staff person who would be an arborist would be able to provide, maybe not recommendations, but would be able to provide sufficient information about, those trees, that tree, the neighborhood, the canopy, what it looks like, and what the impact would be to the environment, so that the committee would not be going into it blind, right? There would be facts available to the committee as they move forward with making those those decisions.
Great, thank you. I guess I saw it a little bit like the Preservation Commission, where you make.
I know we did talk about it. Yeah. And that was something that we considered heavily. But as Allison said, it has to be a standing committee, and so yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Reed.
Thank you. I'll say that. Well, one, I'm a bit unclear. So is staff asking us to I feel like I'm hearing conflicting things. To table this and work on it before we bring it back, or are we being asked to vote on
Just
this
to
tonight?
provide some context here, I suspect where this conversation may go and where my personal opinion lies is that we will end up tabling it for this evening to allow these details to be worked out. And so the discussion tonight is to provide input into these questions to facilitate that discussion.
Okay, thank you. To Councilmember Kelly's point, I actually want to back that up, the term standing committee really has to do with this body. And so this is going to, I'm sorry, what committee? Land Use Commission or?
Human Services.
Human Services. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, if that's the case, why does it have to be a standing committee?
I would defer to my colleagues in the law department. Thank you.
And I'll also just say that we are the City Council of Evanston. We have the power to amend any ordinance to, if we want to amend the Environment Board's definition and allow this particular permit or this particular review to go to them, then we have that power.
Thank you, Councilmember Reed. Chair Newsma, members of the P&D Committee, Alex Ruggie, Deputy City Attorney. I would agree. If you want to amend the duties and powers of the Environmental Board, you can add that as a power and duty, similar to the Land Use Commission. I would just say because it's a board and not a commission, that would be perhaps the other change that would need to be necessitated to make this transition. But that, as the City Council, is something within your powers. So I think from a staff standpoint, as this stands today, the Human Services Committee was the option that was best suited, as the committees are.
Well, Environment Board
Yeah.
ultimately reports to Human Services.
Right, exactly. But then would you take it from Environmental Board to Human Services to City Council?
Right.
That's something you guys will have to discuss amongst yourselves and direct staff, and then we can always make those changes if that's where it wants to go. You could always try to send it to Human Services and see if that's appropriate, and if not, make the changes later. That's up to you.
If I might add also, one of the things that we thought about is that the Environment Board's their purview is to look at the environment and to consider the environment. When we're talking about variations when it comes to removing trees, it seems that property owners would do that in the sense that they would be saying, I don't like the look of my tree, I don't like the way it looks at me in the morning. And that's very much a personal decision about quality of life about your own home. And the Human Services Committee considers the well-being of people, right, and considers the environment in that consideration. The Environment Board is very much considered, it's just the environment, right? And so there's a nuance there that having to think about how do you represent the well-being of this one property owner versus the environmental quality of the entire committee or the entire community, right? And that's sort of a broader purview, I would say, than what the Environment Board maybe, is what they do, if that makes sense.
Okay, so staff, it seems that maybe we'll just leave that where it is.
Yeah, I think, it's considering people's well-being along with the environment, and it's considering one person's well-being along with the environmental quality of the entire community. And that is that seems more okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it seems more extensive than what the Environment Board, their purview is very much the environment, right? And so that was another thing that we considered.
In other words, the Environment Board would always deny it.
I'm not going to speak for them, but, right? Unless they don't like the look of the tree, but,
Okay, well, if there's interest in this committee, I think there is a value in the Environment Board looking at it, and because, maybe it's worth having it go to both committees, maybe it's worth having it just go to Human Services. I don't think that the Human Services Committee, as a member of it for the last 2 years, thinks a whole lot about the environment. It's just not really our workload. So, yeah, I'll just leave that. Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Ravel.
Thank you. The Environment Board does report to us on an irregular basis. So from time to time we do think about the environment. Some of us frequently. I think, I guess I support I certainly support the whole idea of preserving, protecting trees on private property. It's amazing to think that almost 80% of our trees in the community are on private property, and all the benefits they provide to individuals, to family. They're really an important resource for us. I guess I was wondering, have we started work on the what we're calling that, the tree preservation policy? What status is that?
Sure. So that document was actually established about a month ago. Staff brought a smaller ordinance related to preserving trees on public property. There were some changes that needed to be made, and that policy was created at that time. Mm-hmm. So that policy actually exists now. It only relates to public trees, to trees on public property at this time. So there's some portions that are going to be, necessary for both parts, for both public and private trees. Mm-hmm. At this time, the portions that relate to private trees are, thoughts and ideas and, so the beginnings of how it would be framed, but it's not actually published.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because I wonder if there's a value in our waiting on the tree preservation ordinance itself to have a companion there of the policy itself. But anyway,
sure, if that's council's direction.
Right, yeah, okay. That's all for right now.
Councilmember Burns, and then back to Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand just the cost to a property owner. I've been looking for it. The only thing I see is $75 for the tree preservation permit. Is that all we're talking about, or?
So that's for the permit. Okay. If trees are not removed on the property, then that would be the only cost. Okay. If property owners are proposing to remove trees, then it would trigger the mitigation, where property owners would need to either plant trees to replace the tree that's been removed, or they would have the opportunity or the option to pay a fee in lieu of mitigation. Right? They would do that if they were unable or unwilling to plant trees. And staff purposely did not put dollar amounts in the ordinance. Because those are also things that can be more dynamic. So we find that with trees on public property, costs with the inflation that we've had, those costs have increased. And so removing the actual dollar amounts from the ordinance is helpful because it allows staff, of course, we would want them published, we would want them publicly known, no surprises, these are not arbitrary costs, but they are something that staff would be able to, change annually as needed. The other idea behind keeping the actual costs in the policy and not in the ordinance is that we recognize that there are property owners that are financially vulnerable. And so there is opportunity there as well to establish, cost, what's the word I'm looking for? But, to look at what types of costs we might consider for property owners that, don't have the same opportunities as ones who, are more financially established.
But there's a formula,
Mm-hmm.
and what is the formula?
It's in the ordinance.
Would you mind describing that?
Yep. So, and this is sort of an industry standard. It takes the size of the current tree, and there's a coefficient because we recognize that some trees, the idea behind the cost is that trees actually provide benefits that have a dollar amount. We can actually provide those dollar amounts on those trees, and so. It's the size of the tree, and then there's a coefficient that relates to the ecosystem value of the tree, and then it's the cost of planting one replacement tree divided by the size of the trees that you're going to replace. And so it's a little complicated, but I know it's complicated, but essentially it looks at the size of the tree, right, and then it looks like at what you're proposing to plant. If you're actually going to plant trees, that's what's assigned. If you're not actually going to plant trees, then there's a dollar amount.
I think that is all for now. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kelly, and then I have a few comments of my own.
Thank you. So, so if you comply and you have trees, it costs you $75? No. Did I get that right? Like if you...
That's for tree. So that's for tree. It's for the permit for tree preservation, but there's different parts to this. So if you're doing construction on your property and you're not going to remove any trees, you're just going to build around your tree or excavate around your tree, then the arborist would come out and would say, okay, you need to put up an orange fence around your tree at, an 8-foot radius, and you need a root prune right here, and here's your permit stating those things, and that permit would cost $75.
Okay. Okay.
If you're proposing to remove a tree, then we get into
that. I understand.
Yeah,
I just
okay.
had a hard time understanding, oh, you have a great old tree on your property, so you have to pay us $75 because you're not going to take it down. I mean, that to me is a little bit problematic. I'm not
sure. It's a permit fee, right? And it recognizes staff time to come out and say, okay, well, this is how we protect the trees around your construction area,
or just
because there's a site visit, right? There's a site visit involved, and so staff will come out and staff will say, okay, in order to do your construction without damaging your tree, here's your list of,
So that would be just for construction of new development?
Correct. Yes,
okay.
Correct.
Not on single-family homes, and they wouldn't have to pay $75.
Single-family homes.
It's just for construction.
That are doing construction.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like, the average person doesn't have to pay $75 to have a tree on their property.
Okay. Point of clarification, if I may, Chair, on this. I think I know what the issue is. But the way this is written, you wouldn't be able to take down a tree unless it was a construction related, right? Is that the idea with
that's
this?
correct, without seeking a variation.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
I think that might be what Councilmember Kelly is missing. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying.
There's no
that.
reason basically to take down a tree unless.
Further point of clarification,
Right.
you wouldn't be able to remove a covered tree. There are any number of trees to which this ordinance would not apply.
Trees under 6 inches in diameter. Yeah.
Got it. So I'm prepared to support this. If it does end up getting held, I would just ask that if we could sort of review the environmental board. It sounds like there's no real hard and fast reason that precludes the environmental board from reviewing this. But otherwise, I would hold because I think it's so, not hold, I would support this because I think it's so important that we do move forward with the tree ordinance. I think this is well thought out, and I'm prepared to support it this evening. Otherwise, if it does get held again, I'd like to review more of the possibility of having, I think to Councilmember Reed's point, I think this falls much more under the purview of the environmental board. Also in terms of like community benefit, making suggestions on other plannings. But other than that, I thank you for your work on this.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Reed, and I want to be mindful of the time and wrap this conversation up fairly quickly.
I was going to move to table this.
Motion, if you wouldn't mind holding off for a minute or two.
Okay, I will hold off.
To allow me to kind of voice my opinions as a committee member here, with regards to the appeals process, if we could call it that, and which body is the proper body, I would be not inclined to put that in front of the Environment Board. Not that I'm asking for the council or council standing committee to have more work, but I think that's the appropriate next step for the reasons that we've already discussed. Number two, I think it really seems appropriate that when this does come back to us, that we have the policy document in place. And so I just want to make sure you have enough time to put that together. If we hold this for another month, does that give you enough time?
Sure. Yeah, that would be
okay.
Yes.
Okay. And I've been involved in this since being elected to the council, even before, so I'm really antsy to pass something. I want to make sure we are doing it in such a way that it has the full support of everybody in the city. And from my perspective, one of the things that I'm bumping on at the moment is the change in kind of philosophical approach from when I last left it, which was the kind of a fee-based penalty system, which your subsequent homework revealed was not as effective. And so this is something new that we are now considering, and maybe it's a better idea, but I think we need some time to kind of grapple with that and see what kind of impact that will have on our operations here. So I think we are getting very close to where we need to be. And with some additional work, I expect that this will, when it comes back to us, pass hopefully unanimously. So at this point, Councilmember Kelly, you're being
yeah, I was just going to say it can always be amended. I mean, even if we pass it this evening, we can get finally moving forward with the tree ordinance and have this amended at a subsequent date.
That's true, and I think my general approach is that if we were close enough, just a few things need to be tweaked here and there, I would be inclined to pass it for introduction tonight, make those changes before it comes back. I don't think we're quite there yet. So
I think staff would ask, and staff would, if that is the case, then staff would ask for clear direction on which portions do need to be amended.
Right. So based on the discussion tonight, I think we've given you feedback, and I think there can be some additional feedback offline individually between now and then. And Councilmember Reed was recognized. If he wants to yield to Councilmember Burns, I will acknowledge that.
I just want to say I want to make sure in between meetings that the formula doesn't get lost. I do see a value in that because I think as a city we oftentimes we don't always charge as much as we should for the issue that we're trying to address. And then years later, when we make increases, it seems more of a pain than it would have been if we just established a good formula to determine what is the real cost of whatever it is. So I like where we're going on this, and so I just want to make sure between meetings we don't lose this somehow. If we are going to do that, I think we need to discuss that now, because I actually personally like where we're going as opposed to just some arbitrary number that may not represent what it needs to be, whether that's higher or lower. So I like where we're going with that.
Okay. Director Flax.
I think we can do that by saying what the current formula would be at this time in the draft tree protection policy, and then stating how the formula works, that it's tied to the cost and things like that. It's sort of like we have the fee in lieu for the inclusionary housing units on site is tied to the consumer price index, and it has to be checked every time. And
that's available online right now for public trees. So I've actually published it. There's an example, for this size tree, this is what it would cost, and this is what the cost would be. That's actually publicly available online as we speak.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to note one last thing. I think to the question that Councilmember Kelly was asking earlier about the permit. So someone only pays the $75 fee, which based on what Councilmember Burns was just expressing is based on the cost of actually going out and doing the inspection. But they only pay the permit fee if they are granted the ability to cut down the tree? Or they pay just to apply?
It's to receive the tree preservation permit, but not every project will require a removal.
So sometimes we'll still go out, do the inspection, which costs money, but not recoup funds for it.
Right. Well, okay. So let's say you're building a patio. I think maybe an actual example might be helpful. You're building a patio, but you don't necessarily want to remove your tree, but you have a tree close to the construction site, right? And so you apply and you say, okay, I have this tree. I don't want to remove it. So staff will go out and will say, okay, this is how you build your patio safely without impacting your tree. And now you have a permit to proceed. You have you have the tree permit to proceed. You'll need other permits, but your tree permit will proceed with that. And that's the $75 fee. If that project does include a removal, then that permit is the same, like that. There still will be that permit. There'll be another portion to it, which is the mitigation fee. So every project will have a tree preservation permit. Not every project will include a removal or the mitigation fees.
Okay.
And there's also, I will also say that there's an opportunity there to speak with the property owner and say, I don't know if you've considered moving your project over 5 feet, but if you do that, you don't have to remove your tree. Or if you move it over 5 feet, you're going to have less impact to your tree. It'll be healthier for the tree. And
Why?
Sorry?
Why is that a city staff function? Why not? I would imagine that there are private companies out there that can...
Well, at $75, it'll be significantly less than the private companies. And also, this ordinance is moving forward because we recognize that, tree canopy cover is sort of a community good. And so this is a way for, the city to protect the benefits that trees provide to the entire community on private property.
My thing is, well, then if... I just will also add to this, I think we need to make sure we are fully covering the cost of sending the city staff person out there to do this analysis, whether the permit, if we have someone to come out there and they decide not to move forward with their porch or deck or patio or whatever, I think we still need to recoup the cost. And so I wonder if we can change this to an inspection fee rather than just the permit fee, so we can get the revenue from all folks. And then also, I don't feel super enthusiastic about there are all kinds of things that we do not subsidize. We don't subsidize housing here in Evanston very directly. In many cases, maybe ARPA funds allowed us to do a bit of that. But for us to subsidize the cost of doing a tree analysis for more than likely folks of means who are adding additions to their houses, I don't know if that's what we need to be subsidizing. And so I would just encourage us to think about that. Should we fully recoup the cost of these inspections, or should we leave it to the private market? Thank you.
Okay, so at this point, I think the chair would be happy to entertain a motion to
And I will move to table this until
our first meeting in August. If that
I believe there's no meeting. First
there's no meeting in August.
There's a second, the second half of August, yeah.
To the 28th of August.
28th
Our
of
first
August.
meeting in August.
Yeah, it's the first one. It's true. First and only.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I move to table this to our meeting to be held on the 28th of August.
And that motion is seconded by, it's been moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Burns. All in favor of tabling this item until August 28th, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries. Thank you very much. More discussions to follow.
All right. Thank you very much.
We appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that moves us to item 2. If somebody would like to make a motion on item 2.
I will
P2.
move item P2, ordinance 68023 and 69023, amending Title VI of the City Code with an omnibus text amendment package to provide clarifications and updates to the zoning ordinance.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reed, seconded by Councilmember Wynn. Before committee discussion, there will be a short presentation from staff, and I will also acknowledge that Matt Rogers, Chair of the Land Use Commission, is available should we desire to call upon him. So, over to staff.
Good evening, honorable members of the P&D Committee. Melissa Klotz, Zoning Administrator. And if we could have the presentation pulled up, please.
All right.
Perfect, thank you.
There we go.
So we are here for the yearly omnibus text amendment package, and I am extremely hopeful that I never have to do this again, because next year we will be in the midst of a new zoning ordinance rewrite, and then 2 years from now we will hopefully be adopting it. So with this hopeful last omnibus text amendment package, we are looking at some clarifications to the zoning ordinance and updates to best practices. This year we have a total of 11 text amendments that are proposed, so I will try to very quickly run through these in the interest of time. And there we go. Our first 2 text amendments are both related to signage. So approximately a year ago, we moved the sign code from the building ordinance into the zoning ordinance, and when we did so, we uncovered some issues that have popped up throughout the year. So number 1, we would like to clarify the process for unified comprehensive sign plans. This is a process that is already in the code, but it does not specify who does what, who makes final determinations on things, etc. So we are looking to clarify that the Land Use Commission would make final determinations for these, and essentially what it does is it is like a miniature plan development for sign packages for larger properties, things like strip malls, towers, large developments. Properties that otherwise end up with many signs, many variations, a lot of clutter. So overall, it can help those properties have a streamlined process with a better look in the end. Number two, we are looking at clarifying the variation process and standards for signage. So the current variation process for signage is treated just like any other zoning variation process, and what we found out was that means many sign variations are triggering major variations that go to the Land Use Commission, and then when they follow the typical zoning standards for approval, they are essentially non-approvable in almost all cases. So at this point, we have a backlog of businesses who would like to request sign variations, but they know with our current regulations, there is almost no chance of approval and a very lengthy process to go through that. So we are looking at changing this over to be similar to the minor variation process for zoning, except having separate standards of approval that are just for signs, which ironically are the standards for approval that used to be in the building code, but worked very well. Moving on, our third text amendment is to clarify transit-oriented development areas. In 2017, we established TOD areas, and we looked at any area within 1/8 of a mile of a rail station or 1/4 of a mile of a rail station along a commercial corridor. However, we then excluded a significant number of properties, mostly low-density properties that at the time we thought would never want to or need to benefit from TOD requirements. Looking at it again with today's current best practices, we need to be consistent and have that exact boundary follow everywhere, which is then easier for everyone to understand and follow, and just more logical, being that if you are 1/4 or 1/8 of a mile from a rail station, you are roughly a 5-minute walk away, and it should be a TOD area. Also acknowledging that TOD means less parking requirements, and less parking requirements means lowering our housing costs here in Evanston. Number 4, clarify public hearing requests. This is an inconsistency that exists between the zoning ordinance and the Land Use Commission rules, and this has existed this way for at least a decade. It is a holdover from both the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Plan Commission. The Land Use Commission rules specifically say that the Commission may grant continuances to the public when continuances are requested with specific reasoning for them. The zoning ordinance says that they shall grant appeals, meaning if anyone, grant continuances, meaning if someone requests a continuance, it must be granted every time. We do not want that to be weaponized and used to extend processes, so we would like to stay consistent with the may, so that there can be good reasoning provided anytime a continuance is granted. Moving on to number 5, we would like to expand and simplify the existing unique use process. This is within the zoning ordinance already, and to my knowledge has been used one time for the redevelopment of the old District 65 headquarters site, which was converted into condos as well as single-family homes. We would like to open this up to all properties in Evanston, not just local historic landmarks, and simplify it from the full plan development process down to the special use process, which still requires City Council approval. Doing this will allow a significant number of existing buildings in Evanston that are looking for an adaptive reuse to have a possible process to go through and attain exciting adaptive reuse, things like what 1101 Church Street is currently doing, where that church building is being converted into condo units, that type of thing. Number 6, we would like to clarify that curb cuts through street side yards are prohibited when alley access is present. Currently, the zoning ordinance prohibits that for front yards. However, there's a bit of a loophole where if you have a street side yard, it doesn't specifically say that you cannot do that. We would like to close that loophole and make it consistent so that it is the same for everyone, whether you're a corner lot or a non-corner lot. And ultimately, in the end, it is still an eligible major variation, so if there is an extenuating circumstance, someone can request that. Moving on to number 7, clarify non-residential setbacks for accessory structures. Currently, non-residential setbacks are listed for principal structures, but they are not listed for accessory structures. And this has come into play a number of times where a multifamily building that is in a non-residential district would like to add a patio, pergola, etc., and the code is just silent on it. So in the past, staff has taken the policy of apply the typical accessory structure setbacks that residential districts do have, or if it is a district that has even smaller setbacks, then you can go with that lesser setback. Theory being, if you can have an entire building right there, why couldn't you have a patio there? So this just updates the code so that the policy we have been following for some time is within the code and everybody knows what to expect. Number 8, clarify loading berths, yards, and setbacks to follow parking yards and setbacks. Same thing, the code is fairly silent to this, so when we have proposals come in, typically large plan developments where they do need loading berths, we end up in an argument over what the code says about where your loading berth can be. In reality, if a loading berth is open to the sky, it really should only be within a rear yard, and anything else should trigger a site development allowance and be up to City Council. This is just clarifying that. It doesn't change any actual policy. Number 9, clarify definitions, yards, and setbacks for patios and terraces. This one is not an easy fix. This is something that has circled around with zoning staff and the Land Use Commission for many years due to existing poor definitions that just do not make sense today. So staff was requested to try to clarify this in the simplest way possible, and this is a temporary fix until we have a new code, but essentially we're looking at eliminating the definition of terrace and simplifying it down so that if the structure is in a front yard, it is a front porch. If it is elsewhere, it is a patio. And it's just a more logical explanation to people. It does not actually change any regulations. Number 10, this is an exciting new one. We would like to establish a mixed-use market as an eligible use. Lots of larger communities and bigger cities are already doing this. An example in Chicago is Time Out Market, things around Fulton Square. These are areas that in the past may have been industrial warehouse areas, and the market has changed. And now what is happening is you are getting a big building full of a bunch of different uses, pop-up uses, retail, restaurant mixes. It's kind of today's version of a mall. So we have seen this in Evanston. However, the current zoning ordinance doesn't know how to handle it. So what we have to do currently is go through every single use that is within that building, and every single use has to comply with the zoning district. And that rarely works out, and it's not necessarily logical. So instead, we would like to make a mixed-use market use where the majority of uses within the facility must be retail, restaurant, or service-oriented. But then, as long as the majority is, the rest of the uses can be whatever they want. And ultimately, it's going to self-regulate because they're within the same building. Looking at how to regulate it, we are trying to keep it simple, where if it is under 7,500 square feet in size altogether, which is an established cutoff within the zoning ordinance, that it is a permitted use. Then if it's moderate sized, which is typically between 7,500 square feet and 20,000 square feet, it's an administrative review use. And then if it is larger than 20,000 square feet, it would be a special use. That being said, noting that neighborhood business districts often have parking concerns, it is brought down a level in those areas, for instance, the B districts, so that special use kicks in at 7,500 square feet rather than 20,000. Moving on to the last proposal. This is an update to our current process for adjustments to previously approved planned developments. The current process does not work very well. Major adjustments basically redo the entire full plan development process. They run through a public hearing with the Land Use Commission and then on to City Council for a final determination. Current minor adjustments follow an administrative process, but the way that it is written in the zoning ordinance, that never occurs. I can think of one time in the last decade that occurred, and it was because 1717 Ridge realized after the fact that they built the building off by 3 inches. So looking at modifying that, we would like to keep the major adjustment process pretty much the same, where it has to run through that full process again, because those are major changes. It needs a public hearing and then on to City Council. However, we would like to change it so that minor adjustments are anything that does not increase the impact of a site development allowance, and that then skips the public hearing process. The reason for that is we have seen instances where a plan development requests changes, say building materials, and that has to go to a public hearing with the Land Use Commission, where they do not have purview over the thing that changed. So it ends up creating a tricky situation. So we would simply like to skip that, but then keep the final authority with the City Council. With that, are there any questions? I ran through it very quickly.
Thank you very much. At this point, I will acknowledge Chair Rogers of the Land Use Commission. Matt, is there anything you want to add? You're here if we need you. Thank you. Okay, so committee discussion. Councilmember Reed has sought recognition.
Yes, thank you. I had the opportunity to meet with staff earlier to run through this as well. Really helpful. And actually, since we just finished up the adjustments to development plans, the Ann Rainey building in the 8th Ward, the senior building, is an example of where this process became onerous. I would like to make an amendment to 618.3, which is, and I sent that over to the chair and to the mayor. My apologies, I don't know if I sent it to the whole committee. I certainly sent it to staff. But that requirement, yes, with the TOD areas would change, would, instead of modifying to include the 1/4, 1/8, and 1/4 mile, or just say a half mile, which is the standard that is set for how far people are willing generally to walk to a train station. And so I spoke with staff, and staff was supportive of that earlier. I think that stance is maintained over the last few hours. So I would seek a second to that. I move the amendment that I sent over, which would...
Has everybody in the council, on the committee, received that email?
And to clarify, staff is supportive of that. We were simply looking at continuing our conservative approach, but clarifying it by being more consistent. But it is best practice to increase to a half mile, and staff would definitely be supportive of that.
That's an awful lot of territory, new territory, that we would cover under as a transit-oriented development area.
Correct.
Okay. It's been, there's a motion on the table. Is there a second for this motion?
Second.
It's been moved by Councilmember Reed and seconded by Councilmember Burns. Is there any discussion on this motion with Councilmember Reed continuing?
Yeah, I mean, I will, one, I certainly trust the opinions of our staff, but what led me to this in our discussions earlier is, one, we know that this is the distance that folks are willing, on average, to walk to a train station. And we know that this will allow us to get more affordable units in areas that are within that walking distance. And what that means is that we are potentially helping, not only are we providing more affordable housing in these areas, which is already great, but we're helping. And the reason for TOD areas in the first place is to tackle the second greatest cost that families have, which is typically transportation. It's typically in the top 3 for cost for folks. And so if we can reduce transportation costs substantially, that's a goal. And so that's why I put this forward.
And just as a point of clarification, what page and what exact full section number are we talking about?
So in the code, it's 618.3.
It is within definitions.
Yes, definitions. So right at the top of 618.3.
All right, so it would help me to be able to look at this, and what page should I be looking at? Yeah, there's a definition, 618.3 on page 46 of 69, which is also page 81 of 120, that does not include a TOD definition.
So in the packet, page 39 of 120.
Page 39 of 120.
And this is where so it says TOD area, and this is
Right.
what was proposed
Right,
originally.
so that's the text you're talking about, but just
Correct.
so we're abundantly clear what we're proposing to change in the ordinance, let's make sure we are.
Yes, it would be the, in the ordinance, 618.3 definitions is what we are changing.
Okay, and this is number 3, which is, I'm going to click that. I don't want to open that webpage. All right. Staff, are you comfortable that you know what we're talking about here?
Yes.
Okay. So his has been moved and seconded. Is there any additional discussion on this? Councilmember Ravel.
Well, I guess I'd feel more comfortable voting on this if I had a map that had the nice happy circles around it, so I could see what the current 1/4 mile is and then what the 1/2 mile is, so.
If I may ask, Chair.
Okay.
If I may ask,
Sure.
I'm curious what, I would like that map as well, and I
Yeah.
think we can move this forward and see that map, but I am curious what insight the map would provide.
I just feel more comfortable when I have full information about what I'm voting on.
Yeah. And I will note that we are voting tonight for introduction, so there is plenty of time for this map to be prepared.
We could bring back a map of both the current regulations and the proposed half mile and the number of parcels that it entails.
Before our next meeting.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Any further, Councilmember Kelly, discussion on this amendment?
Well, this amendment, but I think it applies to a lot of things where I'd like to better understand impacts with some visuals. I'm concerned about voting on this whole thing right now. I'd like to.
Let's focus on the
Okay.
amendment on the table.
Okay. Well, I agree. I don't want to vote for it until I can have a better sense of the geography and the visuals, the impact.
Point of order or information. I'm first. Actually, can I ask Councilmember Kelly what insight do you believe that would provide seeing this on
So
the map?
deciding on the fly, making a change, already this document itself that we were presented with, to me, is difficult to really process this. There's some things are really almost insignificant, but many, I think, have much broader ramifications than we're aware of. This presentation, this isn't, I don't think, in our packet, right?
Correct.
No, so I would like to, helps clarify things. I would like to have this before making a decision, if we could, if you could share that PowerPoint with us. I'd really like to review all these and really gain a better sense as to impact and not be deciding and trying to visualize here
Okay,
tonight.
so again, let's limit conversation to the motion on the
Yeah.
table, which is the expansion to the TOD radius. I don't see anybody wishing to further that conversation, so I am going to.
Well, if I can just, one last thing on that point. I understand the desire to see the map, and I think that makes sense. I would like to, at some point, understand the reasoning behind it, because it feels a bit, to me, and I'm not accusing any of my colleagues of this necessarily, but I can imagine a scenario or world where someone looks at the map and thinks, well, this touches this area, and I'd be fine with it if it wasn't. I think the policy should be based on, we know that there's clear research on the distance that folks are willing to walk to a transit station. We know that we're encouraging affordable housing near those transit stations because of the 1-2 punch of both affordable housing and making transportation more affordable. So I just don't quite understand the reason for needing to see a map of where this impacts rather than just having the understanding of what this policy does. So I encourage folks to vote yes now to move this forward, and then we will get those maps and we can have further discussions based on that data. But at this time, I think it's appropriate to move forward with this, particularly given staff's recommendation here.
All right, there being no further discussion on the motion, I will call for a vote on Councilmember Reed's motion, which was seconded by Councilmember Burns. All in favor of this motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. This motion carries. And assuming the underlying motion on these ordinances moves forward, it will move forward with that amendment. So that motion behind us, is there any additional discussion on the two proposed ordinances? Councilmember Reed.
Yes, there is one other item. I don't quite know if I have an amendment for it, but I do have a clarifying question from earlier. So when it comes to the proposal around allowing garages and curb cuts, which one was that, number 6? Yes, I think it was number 6, correct? Can someone pull up that slide?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So this would go as a major variation to Land Use Commission, but not to Council. That was my understanding from earlier. Can you remind me of why that is? Oh, because we saw it as too small for, how many of these requests do we get a year, roughly?
Curb cuts to the street when alley access is present, I ballpark probably 25.
Oh, okay.
And probably 24 of them are through front yards, which is why it hasn't come up for so long. Typically, there is an alternative that can be achieved. You can still use your alley access, but you can do a through garage where it has a garage door from the alley and then also through there, so you can extend your driveway further up closer to your house, something like that. So staff generally is able to work out something that achieves whatever the ultimate goal of the property owner is, but not always.
Yeah, I have a resident who, is retired, obviously a senior citizen, a family, and the gentleman and his wife live in a corner property, and they would requesting this side access is not to have to be forced to utilize the alley access, and they're a corner property in the area. Their neighbors have similar arrangements to what they are seeking, and it seems as though this has gotten in the way. I think this is potentially provide them an outlet that is not just staff. This sort of, am I right on that?
So they could proceed right now with a major variation request. I'm sorry, I take that back. They do not need a major variation request right now, because right now it is allowed by the zoning ordinance, but it is not allowed by Public Works policy. Mm-hmm. So we have a conflict between zoning and Public Works. So we are trying to fix that conflict so that the city departments are on the same page, and at that point, the property owner could then request a major variation and go through that process, which by holding a public hearing on it and bringing out the further details and how neighbors may feel about it, that can impact the overall determination on it and the way that Public Works is looking at it. I cannot speak for them,
right,
but just holding the public hearing can bring additional details to light.
My concern with that is that, one, we have, there should be very few places where code and internal policy conflict. And so I am happy that we're making some progress here. That's all my questions for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to just be so careful about curb cuts, because any unnecessary curb cuts create more dangerous sidewalks. So I am, concerned about, if we aren't restrictive enough regarding curb cuts, that we're going to end up with sidewalks that are unnecessarily dangerous.
This ultimately tightens up the regulation while also bringing zoning and public works, integrating the two into having the same policy belief.
So ultimately, you feel this would reduce the number of curb cuts?
I do. As said, there are certain instances where a major variation would be appropriate, but for the most part, this would tighten it up and this would reduce the number of curb cuts that there would be.
Okay, so we'd end up with fewer. Okay, great. That's good to hear. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any further discussion on item P2 as amended. Let's do a roll call vote. I'm sorry.
That's one last question.
Okay.
Really quick. On the variations, I'm sorry, on the minor and major variations for planned development, when I read through it here, it just, if you could, is that number 11 or 12? So any change, update to any change that does not increase the impact of site development allowance does not have a public hearing. Could you give an example of what that would be?
Sure. Increasing the impact would be increasing height. So that's increasing a site development allowance. That has the full process. Decreasing the height, that is not increasing the impact of the site development allowance. So that would skip the public hearing and go directly to City Council.
So just the physical space. I mean, so if something changed, for example, from commercial businesses on the ground floor to parking, but the height remained the same, would that not be considered a major variation?
That would most likely trigger a new site development allowance because you would not have an active ground floor use. So that would trigger the entire process as a major adjustment.
Okay, so I'm just trying to make sure that those sort of changes, like, again, if you reduce commercial space,
But
yeah.
just to clarify, this applies only to previously approved plan developments.
That are requesting a change, a minor or major change.
Right.
Understood.
Right.
But so if you approve them, but they're requesting some, that's why I want to make sure that's not just height. There are other kind of changes that would be very significant. I'm concerned that those would not have to go back. So just if you could explain.
For instance, a development wants to reduce the number of parking spaces that they have. That is increasing the impact of that parking site development allowance so that they would run back through the entire process.
I will recognize Chair Matt Rogers of the Land Use Commission to weigh in here.
Thank you. Matt Rogers, Chair of the Land Use Commission. Council member, what we discovered in doing this was that there was really a lot of inconsistency. So someone could actually physically move a building on the lot, and that was considered a minor variation or a minor change that did not have to come back through under current code. So what we tried to do was determine what would be the most logical thing that would require them to come back through the entire process versus what would be something that we were just prolonging the inevitable for them in certain cases. And so in particular, things like the change of materials we had on the Ann Rainey apartments, we had Northlight Theater come to us because their facade had changed. Lots of this was due to construction materials during COVID. These were things that didn't necessarily change our view on the Land Use Commission about the impact it would have in the standards that we use in approving something. It would be more superficial changes, things that come to us where there's a reduction in the impact of use. Our feeling was that if we have already recommended approval and council has approved a certain level of impact, lessening that should not have to go through the whole process again. So that's why we kind of came up with if it's something you normally would come to us for, it's something that we would hear again in terms of the site allowances that would be
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I imagine. However, I mean, you could have a significant reduction but it could impact the streetscape and it could impact its, how it works with surrounding buildings. So I don't see just saying, oh, they dropped it a few floors, sure, you're good to go.
But it would always come back to City Council.
Right, but it shouldn't. It should go back to our Land Use Commission first and any other, committees that would and staff to weigh in and say, I mean, maybe it doesn't work, maybe it doesn't jive, or it just hits at the wrong place. I just think that just to say because we're saying a development drops.
But that's not something that we, as Land Use Commission, are concerned with necessarily. That's not one of the standards that we apply, is how does it hit the building next to it.
Well, I'm just thinking of an example,
yeah,
but I'm
but
sure
I'm
there's
not-
many other instances that I'm not thinking of right now. That's why I'm a little bit hesitant about this whole document. I feel like there's a lot loaded in this that it's hard to, right on the fly right now, to imagine all the unintended consequences that we might not be considering. I do think there are probably other instances besides, that sort of aesthetic about where a building hits another building because they drop it a few floors. I'm just concerned about just saying only if it increases as opposed to a significant. I'd rather just see a significant change in as opposed to in.
So,
increase.
Councilmember Kelly, are you making a motion to change anything that in the draft ordinance in front of us?
So again, there's many items in here that I'm, and this is presented very clearly to us like this. I would like to hold this to have time to just also talk with Chair Rogers about some of these items between now and I'd like to hold the whole document over as well.
And I'm sorry, Councilmember Reed.
I just want to note that.
Councilmember Reed.
Yes, I just want to note as a point of information that, as our chair said earlier, this is for introduction. This will have 2 readings at council. There will be opportunity to have these discussions in between and make amendments as you see
Right,
fit.
but I think this is the committee that discusses in greater depth this type of an item. So I would like to see it come back to P&D for more further discussion.
And I will also say that you're fighting to make sure that the Land Use Commission is hearing this stuff because you value the Land Use Commission. Well, the Land Use Commission sent this to us. And this is what they're asking to make their processes more efficient and to make sure that we're aligning our code with what the mission is that we gave Land Use Commission.
So thank you, Councilmember Reed. Thank you, Chair Rogers.
Add one last little thing.
One
real
last
quickly.
little thing.
We are kind of on a timeline here. We have projects that are coming up that some of these things will drastically affect. I'm thinking in particular Northwestern Stadium. The signage, we don't have guidelines for signage as of yet. So I would encourage council to do its due diligence and this commission to do their due diligence, but also to recognize that there are things working their way through the pike that we will be needing some of these tools for.
So Councilmember Kelly has expressed some concerns, but has not heretofore articulated a motion, so I am prepared to take a vote on this.
Well, I did. But would it be possible for the Land Use Commission to identify those that are most urgent and for us to have a hold and then come back and vote on the ones that are most urgent? Like you said, the signage and whatever you feel like right now you need to have voted on and passed.
I suppose I could talk. We're meeting Wednesday night. I don't know the process.
I will clarify that. I asked Chair Rogers that myself because this was such a large thing to pull together, and ultimately in our own discussion we determined that they are all essential. So ultimately I would request that if you have concerns about any specific text amendments, if you would like to pull those off so that the rest could move forward, but they all are essential. They're all on the list because issues have popped up throughout the year, and at this point we have things waiting on them.
Thank you both.
So there being no further discussion and no motions on the table, I will request a roll call vote on this item as amended.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn? Councilmember Kelly?
No.
Councilmember Nusma?
Aye. So by a vote of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1, item P2 passes, which brings us to items for discussion. We are 45 minutes after the designated start time for City Council. This discussion has already been pushed back once, so I do want to hold this discussion this evening, but I will just ask for everybody's collaboration on not letting this conversation drag out. So if somebody could make a motion on item D1 to allow us to discuss this, and then we'll start with a presentation from Kate Sterling.
I'll move discussion regarding a community design commission.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded, so here's how things are going to play out. Kate Sterling will make a short presentation, and he is soliciting input on 5 particular questions, and I'd like our conversation to be hopefully geared towards those 5 questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Newsma, members of the committee, Director Flax. My name is Kate Sterling, City Planner and Community Development Department. In lieu of a presentation, I just have some prepared marks, maybe 5 minutes of your time, and then more interested in your discussion. So I was lucky enough to work on this project. It's very interesting. The creation of this commission was initiated by Councilmember Kelly. It was co-sponsored by Councilmembers Suffredin and Herrick-Harris. This follows a prior removal of the Design and Project Review Committee, which came from a prior referral by Councilmember Suffredin. The framework for this commission and the materials within the packet include the body's statement of purpose, critical goals and objectives, composition and terms, the procedure for hearings and making recommendations, timing for reviews, types of reviews offered or mandated, applicability and exceptions, and the commission's proposed powers and duties. I believe it to be a very comprehensive document, although it's not drafted in ordinance form at this point. Nearly 24 design-related boards and commissions across the country were also surveyed, and their functions and outcomes analyzed for their ability to advance Evanston's unique land use goals and objectives. A more in-depth comparison matrix is within the packet for 6 municipalities that were referenced in more detail. There's also a comparative analysis of how this commission would relate to the other boards and commissions that the City of Evanston currently has, and a diagram of where this body would insert itself within the entitlement process. The framework before incorporates many common best practices, but it's also highly innovative. It intends to position Evanston as a leader in the use of good design and urbanism to positively impact human experience and to create a more sustainable, economically resilient, and vibrant community. Foremost, this commission is envisioned as a resource, working group, and advisory body that offers technical assistance to applicants, aids other commissions and the City Council in taking more informed action on projects, and promotes quality, efficiency, and transparency in the city's development and redevelopment goals through the creation of design-related resources, guidelines, studies, and reports. This body is intended to act as a partner in the design and development process rather than an adversary, and it uniquely avails itself to developers and design professionals early and often. It acknowledges that change is necessary in advancement of our shared goals and ultimately sees change as an indicator of a healthy environment. It therefore seeks to effectively guide that change to appropriately leverage public and private development and design-related opportunities to support creation of enriching environments. The Commission's goal is to position projects for success, to mutually achieve private interests while advancing the city's goals and objectives around the creation of sustainable, vibrant, and human-centered places, places that prioritize people, walkability, and alternative and mass transit over cars, vibrant human experiences and housing over parking, authentic, compatible, and visually arresting architecture over commodified and isolating development patterns. The work of this commission seeks to advance the creation of vibrant and comfortable spaces that have spirit and attract people to them, places that foster socialization and spontaneous interaction amongst our residents. Although I'm sure you're here with many questions, I understand our time is very limited. This was continued once before. There are 5 very specific questions that we're looking for feedback on, although I'm sure you're inclined to opine on anything within this document. Whether further development of this framework and potential creation of this body should wait until after the new comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance are completed, or if this body should be empowered and act as a valuable asset that would guide aspects of those plans and subsequently take ownership over implementation of their design-related initiatives. In order to maximize volunteer capital and the ability to be a working body primarily that produces documents and reports for consideration, should non-residents who work in Evanston as well as associate members be considered? Should the types of applicable or excluded projects be adjusted, or are they appropriate? Are there specific design-related issues in Evanston that members of this committee feel are important to address or that require more active management? Are there questions, additions, or concerns with the review process, types of reviews offered, or the criteria used to review projects? And are there additional powers and duties that should be considered, or any which are currently included that are problematic? Thank you very much. I look forward to the discussion.
you, Mr. Sterling. This is for discussion this evening. We won't be voting, so let's begin with Councilmember Burns.
I mean, just to try to move things forward, this is just discussion. So, I mean, I certainly support moving this for introduction, and I'm not ready to, if this was for action today, I wouldn't be ready to vote on it, but I'm certainly happy to move this forward as introduction to give me some time to meet with Kate and some of the other staff members and community members that have been a part of developing this. So hopefully we can kind of get moving to council and just kind of move this forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Burns, Councilmember Kelly, and then Councilmember Ravel.
Yeah, I'll just make a quick comment. I want to thank staff for the really outstanding work that Kate Sterling and Elizabeth Williams did on this in researching cities across the nation that have these design commissions and their impacts on the city. So thank you very much for your outstanding work.
Councilmember Ravel.
I'm wondering whether we've discussed the staff resources that would be needed if we had this commission. It seems like it's a pretty busy commission as outlined with lots of meetings, lots of reports and everything. So that would be a question in my mind before moving forward. I'm wondering if we had the design commission in place for the legacy project to go through, what would that ultimate process have looked like? For example, if the legacy folks had gone to the design commission and said, here is our proposal, and design commission made a lot of suggestions, and legacy adopted all those design suggestions, would that then tip the scale for the land use commission at all? And what kind of impact would that have on the council's decision? I'm just a little curious about, how that would all come to us. I mean, I do like the idea of our having beautiful buildings, and I guess I would feel at this point anyway more comfortable having the concept of the design commission be something that was considered in the comprehensive plan process, and that it would be seen as something to be created as part of adopting the comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Councilmember Ravel. Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, I just say it is advisory, and in the past when we had DAPR, that was also advisory, and so this gives replaces. I know much of the public was very concerned about the elimination of DAPR because they would frequently make public comment there and weigh in. This offers a more a legislative body giving. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Sterling, but this would be an advisory body making a recommendation. It wouldn't be binding, and so just like DAPR was, but in this way it is public, subject to OMA, and with resident experts who care about our city and who live here. And I also think it's really important if you look at it, it just brings focus and attention to how much we care about design in Evanston and about creating a city that is attractive and more, and that meshes well that we understand our community and what's needed for our community as well. Some cities have competitions every year on the best design, and that's sponsored often by these design commissions. So I think it just really lends itself to creating a more overall attractive city. So I don't think in principle, the same way DAPR, however, Land Use Commission may have weighed in on that, this would have maybe a little more impact because it's residents and a public body.
Councilmember Ravel.
Well, just to answer one of the specific questions, I would feel comfortable if the commission included non-residents, but with the kinds of expertise the commission needs, but who have some kind of a connection with Evanston.
Thank you. I'll weigh in myself to the specific question regarding the Legacy Horizon project. Would they have taken input from this body? In that particular case, the developers did not take input from conversations with council members directly prior to that application. So I suspect no would be the answer in that case. So my thoughts on this are, I'm kind of conflicted because I 100% understand and support the need to have some kind of thoughtful approach to urban design.
And I made that point in the discussion of the Horizon Legacy project a couple weeks ago. It's in our community's best interest to have some firm guidelines in place that allow developers a clear delineation of what's acceptable and what's not. Some things are easy to quantify, like building height, floor area ratio, density. When it comes to aesthetics, kind of by very definition, that is hard to quantify, difficult, if not impossible to quantify. And so while understanding the need to have a beautiful downtown, who gets to decide what that means? And how can we define what beautiful means? Going back to my high school English class, Howard Rourke and Peter Keating couldn't agree. And I don't think it would be productive to have a committee where we've got one architect arguing for Ionic columns, and the other architect is arguing for Doric columns, and really what the city council wants is Corinthian. And that about is the extent of my architectural knowledge. So I'm just concerned about creating a committee that's the taste police. And having that not be a productive value-added part of this process, while fully acknowledging the intent is noble and good. So I'm hung up on that. But in specific response to Cade's first question, should further development of the framework for this commission wait until after the comprehensive plan and zoning ordinances are adopted? My answer is yes. We are about to engage on a very in-depth, long-term, 18-month project to look at all the things that are coming into play here, including those quantitative aspects of building height, floor area ratio, stuff like that. So I think this is something that we should keep in mind during that discussion. I don't think it would be appropriate at this point to form a new commission. I think that would be premature. Let's see what happens out of this comprehensive design process. We're going to learn a lot over the next 18 months. We're going to have a lot of public input. And then let's see where we're at. Something might kind of naturally kind of materialize out of that discussion that will make a lot more sense. And so that's where my mind is. Again, we're not voting. That's my 2 cents worth. Councilmember Wynn.
Well, I've been on the council long enough for at least 2 iterations of some type of design process, and the taste police was a phrase used in a number of times over the history of this. I have some additional questions about the process, but I can talk to Kate about those separately. I think that you raise an interesting point that we're about to embark on this a comprehensive plan, and should we put something that is very different into our process, just as we're about to rewrite the process? So I think that's something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kelly, back to Councilmember, I'm sorry, Councilmember Reed has not been recognized on this topic, so I'm going to recognize Councilmember Reed and then Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, I just want to add, I agree with what Councilmember Wynn just said, so I'm there. But I also want to, if we, in 2 years or however long, do move forward with this process, one thing that I want us to be cautious of, and I hope it wasn't mentioned already, but is to make sure that if we do create a committee like this, that there are very clear guidelines, or that it's an advisory body, because I fear that a committee like this could become make the process more political and less, following some clear set of guidelines, and make the process muddier and murkier, and make Evanston potentially a more unfriendly place for folks to come and develop. But as long as this is created in a very thoughtful manner that uses this body as DAPR was previously used to help people get to that yes, then I'm fine with it. So thank you.
Councilmember Kelly.
Sure. I think Mr. Sterling cut his presentation off short. The Chicago has this, Wilmette, Oak Park, Madison, and I think it's important that we have a more, and I think he will give a broader presentation of this and why this isn't so important and the positive impact this has on so many communities nationwide that we're really actually just a little behind. And it replaces DAPR in the sense that as a meeting and a voting body, all the information that each department would weigh in on would still be presented to that body and the Land Use Commission, but I would ask that everyone, wait to hear a little bit more about the other cities that do have this, the many, many cities around us that have this, including Chicago, and why it's so important. This isn't, we're not, proposing something unusual or new. This is a practice that some of the finest cities are using, and it's having tremendous benefits for the city.
Anybody else want to weigh in here?
I'll just quickly say, Chair, if I can.
Sure.
I knew there was a reason why I held my my comments. You perfectly summed up my number one concern. Taste police, 100%. And part of the work that I will want to do in between time, no matter when it comes back up, is some of the work that I started early on in the term that I haven't completed, is just really rethinking how we can get much more broader participation, not just in committees like these, but across our boards, committees, and commissions, because my fear is that we really are, we're getting a certain perspective from our BCCs, but not as much as we're not tapping into as much of the community as we can. And so I think there's some fundamental flaws in the way we, just in the way we, assign people to these responsibilities and how we recruit members. And we need to do a lot more work on that before I would feel comfortable moving forward with this. But again, I'm fine either or. I see a value in waiting until the comp plan is completed. If we want to move it forward to introduction, there's enough support to do that. I'm happy to support that as well.
So as usual, the feedback is as clear as mud. But if I could attempt to summarize, I think the prevailing but not unanimous opinion of this committee is to hold off for now. And if and when we get to the point of considering this, that then there are some concerns about how we would go about doing that. If somebody would like to weigh in and say something different, please do so.
I would not say that. I think it should be brought back, and we're rushing through this tonight because we're short on time. So I would ask that we have another opportunity to hear this, to hear about other cities, to understand it. I don't think we have a robust enough understanding of the value of this to make any sort of a decision. Anyway, this is just for discussion. So I would ask that we not give direction to say hold off, but rather let's find time at either a separate P&D or just make sure that we allow time to understand this better. I don't think we should wait for the comprehensive plan to be completed. To the founder of Design Evanston's point, this could be a couple of years. This is something that I feel, and many people in the city feel, was needed a long time ago. So,
point of order, I would maybe suggest a motion to have it appear in a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever.
Well, this would come back for introduction, I believe, for a vote, for action. So I would ask that it come back, come back for discussion and action, and we can amend any part of it that you want then. But otherwise, that would be the normal. So I don't know why can't we let this come back for introduction, and at that point, if somebody would like to amend it, if you still continue to feel that you'd
I'll recognize Deputy City Attorney Ruggie to advise us on our procedural options.
Thank you, Chair Newsma. I think at this point, staff was looking for suggestions on how to move forward. An ordinance has not been drafted yet. So if the suggestion is to staff to draft the ordinance to bring it back for introduction, we're just looking for that from the committee. If the committee's direction is to wait, then we won't draft the ordinance. So we're just talking about staff time. So I think we do need some clear direction on whether or not we're going to begin drafting that ordinance, or if we're going to wait until the comprehensive plan.
Councilmember Kelly sees things differently. I think the prevailing opinion up here is to wait.
I think somebody needs to make a motion.
Yeah, I'll move that this comes back in 2 months, 3 months.
As an ordinance.
As an ordinance, yeah. I'll move in 3 months, which would be our first meeting in, what is that, October, November? we'll say October.
Councilmember Reed, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe the bulk of the work is done, that it would just need to be refined into an ordinance form and could come back at the end of August. Does that seem reasonable? If not,
I don't know if I would support that.
And I'll recognize Mr. Sterling. Bite my tongue for now.
I think, to answer Councilmember Kelly's question, I think the bulk of the work has been done. What's not clear is if the bulk of you are comfortable with what's been done, and if we need to revise or change that. And maybe that's a series of offline conversations with individual council members to get a better understanding of what their concerns are. But could this be easily translated into an ordinance? Yeah, of course.
Then we just have essentially this same discussion in a few months.
Correct.
And my read of the room here is it would get voted down. My personal preference is to press the hold button on this conversation. And, to reiterate my answer to your first question is, yes, we should pause this conversation until the comprehensive plan process is playing out. So that's my preference. I'm reading the room here, and
I think we
that's my
seconded
sense.
a motion, right?
Until I'll move that we hold this off until the comprehensive plan is over.
I don't
Let's see
think
if we can get
even that doesn't
needs
require a motion.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty far out.
Right. So I think the next step here is some offline conversation, and then when there is enough, consensus to move this to the next step, whenever that might be.
Or when someone's chair who wants to move it forward at that time, they'll have that ability to do that.
Understanding that that's not the unanimous opinion of this committee, I think that's the feedback that the committee is delivering. Okay. Anything else? Very good. There being no further business to come before this committee, I declare the meeting adjourned at 7:38.